The massive ship called Dominion's Edge floated in the darkness between stars like a metal mountain built for war. Commander Vexstar stood on the bridge, and his black scales reflected the light from dozens of control panels around him. He was 8 feet tall, with muscles like steel cables and eyes that glowed red in the dim lighting of his flagship. For 3,000 years, his people, the Zephyrians, had ruled the galaxy through strength and superior technology, and nothing had ever challenged their dominance until now. The emergency council meeting had been called because something impossible was happening in the Outer Rim territories. Entire colonies were vanishing without any distress signals or evidence of battle. Fleet patrols sent to investigate never returned, and their ships disappeared as completely as if they had never existed at all. Even the mighty Zephyrian military could not explain what was destroying their settlements and killing their people. Representatives from 40 different species gathered in the Great Council chamber aboard Vexstar's ship, and the air buzzed with dozens of different languages being translated by advanced computers. The Mentari delegates stood near the front with their insect-like bodies covered in natural armor that could stop laser blasts. General Kethran was their leader, and his 4 arms ended in claws sharp enough to cut through starship hull plating. His people had never lost a ground battle in their long history of warfare. The Nexari sent their best scientists, and these beings looked almost like living energy contained in roughly humanoid shapes. Dr. Zalanith spoke for her people, and she could manipulate reality itself through advanced technology that other species barely understood. The Nexari had developed weapons that could fold space and time and make enemy attacks turn back on themselves. Near the back of the chamber, in seats that most delegates ignored completely, sat the human representatives. Captain Jake Morrison wore a simple uniform without the decorations and medals that covered the alien officers around him. Next to him, Lieutenant Amy Davis took notes on a basic tablet computer, while the other species used holographic displays and neural interfaces. The humans had been part of the Galactic Council for only 50 years, and most aliens barely remembered they existed. Commander Vexstar activated the main display and showed the locations where colonies had disappeared. Red markers covered nearly a dozen star systems, and the pattern made no sense to traditional military thinking. The attacks are random and follow no strategic logic, Vexstar said, and his deep voice carried easily through the chamber. Our enemies strike without warning and leave no survivors to tell us what happened. General Kethran stepped forward, and his claws clicked against the metal floor. The Mentari volunteer to lead the hunt for these cowards, he declared. Another warriors in his delegation roared their approval. We will find them and tear them apart with our bare hands, as we have done to every enemy we have ever faced. Dr. Zalaneth disagreed with the Mentari approach, and her voice sounded like music made from starlight. Brute force will not solve this problem, she said, while energy patterns danced around her fingers. We need to study the attack patterns and use our technology to understand what we are fighting before we can defeat it. The debate continued for hours as different species proposed their own solutions to the crisis. Some wanted to build bigger weapons, while others suggested retreating to more defensible positions until they understood the threat better. The arguments grew heated as proud warriors and brilliant scientists clashed over the best way to protect their people. Captain Jake Morrison listened to everything without speaking, and his quiet attention went unnoticed by most of the delegates. Amy Davis watched the alien discussions and made careful notes about their military doctrines and tactical preferences. The humans had learned long ago that listening was often more valuable than talking when dealing with species who valued strength over wisdom. Vexstar called for volunteers to form a joint battle fleet. Every major species stepped forward. Immediately, the Zephyrians would provide their massive dreadnoughts that could crack moons with their main guns. The Mentari offered their assault ships designed for boarding actions and close combat. The Nexari brought their reality warping technology that could make enemy weapons malfunction or turn space itself into a weapon. The human delegation was assigned to support roles, which meant they would follow behind the main battle fleet and provide medical assistance or technical help if needed. Most aliens considered this appropriate, since humans had no impressive weapons or advanced technology to contribute to the war effort. Captain Morrison accepted the assignment without complaint or argument much to Amy's surprise. As the meeting broke up and various species began preparing their most powerful warships, Jake Morrison sent a coded message back to Earth using communication channels that the aliens did not monitor. The message was simple, but its meaning would have shocked the other council members if they had understood it. Enemy contact imminent. Request authorization for Protocol 7. Full observation and analysis. Required before engagement. The response came 12 hours later through the same hidden channels, and Amy Davis was the only other human who saw it. Protocol 7 authorized, the message read. Remember why we choose the back row? Watch and learn, then teach them what they need to know. The galaxy will understand soon enough that strength is not the same as wisdom. Jake Morrison deleted the message and began preparing the human ships for departure. Their vessels looked plain and unremarkable compared to the alien warships gathering around them, but they contained the most advanced sensor arrays and analysis computers that human science could produce. While other species built weapons, the humans had focused on building tools for understanding their enemies. Amy Davis finally asked the question that had been bothering her since the council meeting ended. Why did we not argue for a more important role in the fleet? She said while checking their ship assignments. We could contribute more than just medical support if the other species would let us. Jake Morrison looked out at the stars and his expression was thoughtful and sad. Because Amy, he said in a voice that carried the weight of hard-earned knowledge, sometimes the most important thing you can do is let everyone else think you are harmless while you figure out how to save them from themselves. The galaxy is about to learn a lesson about the difference between being strong and being smart. The great fleet began forming up around the Dominion's edge, as dozens of species contributed their finest warships to the common cause. Massive vessels, bristling with weapons and armor, took positions in the front ranks, while smaller support ships like the human contingent arranged themselves safely in the rear. Nobody paid attention to the plane ships from Earth as they prepared to witness events that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. 3 weeks had passed since the great fleet departed from the council meeting, and now they flew deep into the outer rim, where colonies had been vanishing without trace. Commander Vexstar stood on the bridge of his massive flagship and watched the stars through reinforced viewing ports that could withstand the blast of a dying sun. His ship was called the Iron Thunder, and it stretched for miles through space like a floating city built for war. Behind him flew dozens of other Zephyrian dreadnoughts, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet in half. The Mantari war fleet kept pace nearby, and their ships looked like giant insects made of black metal and sharp edges. General Kethron commanded from his vessel. The Bloodfang and his warriors prepared for battle with the same fierce joy their ancestors had shown when hunting dangerous prey on their homeworld. They sharpened their claws and checked their weapons while singing ancient songs about glorious death in combat. The Nexari brought their most advanced technology in ships that seemed to bend space around themselves. Their vessels looked like living things made of light and energy, and they could do impossible things, like exist in 2 places at once or travel through dimensions that normal matter could not touch. Dr. Zalaneth worked at controls that humans could barely understand, and her people prepared reality warping devices that could turn enemy attacks back on themselves. Far behind all these mighty forces, the human ships maintained their position, like small fish following great predators through dangerous waters. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the science vessel Quiet Observer, and his ship looked plain and simple compared to the alien warships around them. The human fleet consisted of only 12 vessels, and none of them carried the massive weapons that other species favored. Instead, they were packed with sensors and computers and communication equipment that could record everything that happened in battle. Amy Davis worked at her station and monitored the data streams flowing between human ships. She had been promoted to lieutenant after showing skill at understanding alien technology, and now she coordinated information gathering for the entire human contingent. The Zephyrians are picking up something on long-range sensors, she reported to Jake. Energy signatures that do not match any known technology. Jake nodded and opened communication channels to the other human vessels. Commander Ben Parker responded from the research ship Silent Watcher, while Engineer Lisa Grant checked in from the technical support vessel Patient Study. All human crews had been briefed on their real mission, and they knew their job was not to fight, but to learn everything possible about whatever enemy they were about to face. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the Kepler 7 colony system, and what they found there made even the bravest warriors pause in shock. 3 planets that had once supported millions of lives now hung dead and empty in space. The cities were still there, but no energy signatures showed any sign of life. The orbitations remained in perfect condition, but they were as silent as tombs. Floating in the void, Commander Vexstar ordered his scouts forward to investigate, and the smaller ships approached the dead worlds with weapons ready. What they reported made no sense to military minds trained in conventional warfare. "No signs of battle damage," came the voice of a Zephyrian pilot. "No weapon impacts or explosion craters." The cities looked perfect but completely empty, as if everyone just disappeared. Amy Davis studied the sensor readings and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature on her ship. "Jake, this is wrong," she said quietly. 3 billion people do not just vanish without leaving some trace of what happened to them. Jake agreed, but said nothing to the other ships. Human protocol required complete data gathering before making any conclusions about unknown threats. The answer came without warning when space itself seemed to tear open like fabric being cut by invisible knives. Ships emerged from the wounds in reality, and they looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. The vessels were black as the void between stars, but they seemed to absorb light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Their hulls shifted and changed as if they existed only partly in normal space and time. General Catherine was the first to react because Mentari warriors never hesitated when faced with an enemy. "All ships attack formation now," he roared over the communication channels. "Show these cowards what happens when they face true warriors." His fleet moved forward with weapons blazing, and their battle cries echoed through space on every frequency. The enemy response was swift and terrible. Beams of energy that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once reached out from the black ships and touched the Mantari vessels. Where the beams struck, matter simply stopped existing, as if the universe had forgotten it was ever there. Entire sections of warships vanished without explosions or debris, leaving behind only empty space where proud vessels had been moments before. Dr. Zalaneth tried to counter with Nexari reality manipulation technology, but her weapons had no effect on an enemy that existed partially outside normal space and time. "Their ships are phasing between dimensions," she reported with growing panic in her voice. "Our targeting systems cannot lock onto something that is not fully present in our reality." Commander Vexstar led his dreadnoughts into battle with the courage his people had shown for thousands of years. The massive Zephyrian ships opened fire with plasma cannons that could melt asteroids and missile systems that tracked targets across star systems. But their attacks passed harmlessly through enemy vessels that shifted out of phase just before impact. The black ships returned fire with weapons that convinced matter to forget how to hold together, and Zephyrian crews watched in horror as their mighty hulls dissolved around them. Throughout the carnage, the human ships maintained their position in the rear and did nothing but watch and record. Amy Davis felt sick as she watched the tactical display fill with red markers showing destroyed Allied vessels. "Should we not help them somehow?" she asked Jake with desperation in her voice. "They are dying out there while we do nothing." Jake. Morrison watched the battle with sad eyes, but his expression remained calm and determined. "We are helping them, Amy," he said in a voice that carried the weight of hard decisions. "We are learning how they die so that others might live." The human ships continued to gather data on enemy movements and weapon signatures while alien crews fought and died in the space around them. The battle lasted for 6 hours, and when it ended, more than half the great fleet was gone. The mysterious enemy had vanished as suddenly as they appeared, leaving behind only wreckage and the terrifying knowledge that something ancient and powerful had returned to threaten all life in the galaxy. The survivors limped away from the battle zone, while the humans followed quietly behind, still recording everything and preparing for what would come next. The surviving ships limped back to the rally point near the Centaurus station, and the mood among the alien crews was darker than the space between stars. Commander Vexstar stood in the medical bay of his damaged flagship and stared at the mechanical that had replaced the one he lost when reality warping beams tore through his bridge. Half his crew was dead, and his mighty Iron Thunder looked like a broken toy compared to its former glory. The other Zephyrian commanders reported similar losses, and their proud voices now carried notes of fear that had never been there before. General Kethron was dead along with most of his warriors and the few surviving. Montari spoke in whispers about enemies that could not be touched by claw or fang. Their new leader, Colonel Dexmar, had watched his people's greatest fighters dissolve into nothing, and now he questioned everything the Montari had believed about strength and honor in battle. How do you fight something that does not exist in the same reality as you? He asked anyone who would listen, but no one had answers. Dr. Zalaneth gathered the surviving Nexari scientists and tried to make sense of what they had witnessed. Their most advanced technology had proven useless against an enemy that treated the laws of physics like suggestions rather than rules. "We have studied dimensional manipulation for centuries," she said to her colleagues. "Yet these beings use reality itself as a weapon in ways we cannot comprehend." The emergency meeting took place aboard the crippled Dominion's Edge, and the atmosphere was thick with desperation and blame. Representatives from dozens of species sat around the council table, and their faces showed the shock of beings who had never known defeat. Commander Vexstar looked across the room at the small human delegation, and his mechanical hand clenched into a fist. "While warriors died, you sat in safety like scavengers waiting to feed on our remains," Vexstar said, and his voice carried all the pain and rage of a proud people brought low. "Your ships remained untouched while ours burned because you lacked the courage to stand with your allies in battle." Other voices joined in the accusations, and soon the chamber filled with angry words directed at the humans who had watched their friends die without lifting a finger to help. Amy Davis felt the weight of those stares and wanted to defend her people, but Jake Morrison remained calm and patient as he had throughout the entire crisis. Captain Jake Morrison stood slowly, and his quiet movement somehow commanded attention from the entire room. "I request permission to share our analysis of the battle data," he said in the same measured tone he had used during peaceful negotiations. "Perhaps our observations can help prevent future losses." The alien leaders wanted to reject anything humans had to say, but they were desperate enough to listen to anyone who might offer hope. Commander Vexstar nodded grudgingly and gestured for Jake to proceed. What happened next changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare and the species they had dismissed as harmless academics. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Martinez activated the holographic display and filled the chamber with detailed recordings of the battle. Every enemy ship movement had been tracked and analyzed, and every weapon signature had been recorded and studied. The humans had not been hiding in the back like cowards, but rather gathering intelligence with a thoroughness that amazed the alien observers. "The enemy vessels do not phase through reality as we initially believed," Steve explained as the display showed enhanced sensor readings. "They exist in multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, which gives them the appearance of shifting between realities. Their weapons do not destroy matter, but rather convince it to forget the quantum forces that hold it together." Amy Davis stepped forward, and her role as a xenopsychology specialist became clear as she began to explain human understanding of warfare. "Every species in this galaxy fights like apex predators," she said, while the display showed tactical analyses of dozens of different alien military doctrines. "You assume your strength and technology and courage will carry the day because that is how apex predators think?" The revelation continued as Amy explained what made humans different from every other spacefaring race they had encountered. Humans spent millennia fighting other humans who were exactly as intelligent and determined as ourselves. We could not rely on superior strength or technology because our enemies possessed the same advantages we did. This forced us to develop different approaches to conflict. Jake Morrison took over the presentation and began to reveal the philosophy that guided human military thinking. We learned that victory does not go to the strongest, but to those who understand their enemy better than their enemy understands them. When we joined the galactic community, we recognized immediately that we were physically outmatched by almost every species we met. The display showed human military history, and alien observers learned about battles where numerically inferior forces had defeated superior enemies through intelligence and patience rather than brute force. They saw how humans had turned disadvantages into advantages and used enemy strengths against them through careful planning and superior understanding of battlefield psychology. This led to the development of Protocol 7, Jake continued as the display showed human fleet doctrine. When facing unknown threats, we always observe first and act only when we fully understand what we are fighting. Our ships are not designed primarily as weapons platforms, but as mobile intelligence gathering systems. Amy Davis explained the psychological component that the aliens had missed entirely. Every species we have studied approaches warfare with the mindset of an apex predator, but humans learn to think like both predator and prey. We understand that sometimes the wisest choice is to appear weak while gathering strength for the moment when action becomes necessary. Engineer Lisa Grant joined the presentation and revealed the true nature of human support vessels. While other species focused on building bigger weapons and stronger shields, humans had developed something completely different. Their ships contained laboratories and analysis equipment that could study any technology and find ways to counter it through understanding rather than superior firepower. Your enemy relies on psychological warfare as much as advanced technology, Lisa explained while showing detailed breakdowns of Void Collective battle tactics. They expect you to react like apex predators with aggression and pride and fear. When you behave predictably, they can use that predictability against you. The final piece of the revelation came when Jake Morrison explained why humans had chosen to position themselves in the back row of galactic society. We are not cowards and we are not weak, he said with quiet conviction. We made a deliberate choice to let others believe we were harmless while we studied and learned from every species we met. Knowledge is the only weapon that becomes more powerful the more you use it. Commander Vexstar stared at the human captain with new understanding dawning in his reptilian eyes. The beings he had dismissed as scavengers were actually the most dangerous strategists in the galaxy, and they had been preparing for threats like the Void Collective since the day they first left their homeworld. The revolution in galactic military thinking had begun not with weapons or technology, but with the simple human understanding that true strength comes from wisdom rather than force. The weeks following the revelation in the council chamber brought changes that no one in the galaxy had expected, and Commander Vexstar found himself working alongside beings he had once dismissed as harmless scholars. The proud Zephyrian commander sat in a strategy room aboard his rebuilt flagship and studied tactical displays that showed information in ways his people had never imagined. Across from him, Captain Jake Morrison explained human military doctrine with the patience of a teacher, working with a stubborn but intelligent student. Your instinct is to attack immediately when you see an enemy, Jake said while highlighting patrol patterns on the holographic display. This works well against opponents who think like you do, but the Void Collective expects that response and uses it against you. Vexstar's mechanical hand tapped against the table as he struggled to understand concepts that went against everything his warrior culture had taught him about honor and courage in battle. The first wave of human advisors arrived on ships that looked no more impressive than the support vessels that had followed the fleet into disaster. Commander Helen Torres led a team of specialists who had spent their entire careers studying alien military psychology, and now they spread throughout the surviving fleet to begin the most ambitious military reformation in galactic history. Helen was a small woman with gray hair and quiet eyes, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had planned victories against impossible odds. Working with Dr. Zalaneth and the surviving Nexari scientists, Helen began integrating human sensor technology with alien reality manipulation devices. The combination produced results that amazed even the advanced Nexari because humans approached dimensional physics from directions they had never considered. "Your people think in straight lines," Helen explained to the energy being while they calibrated new detection equipment. "But reality moves in curves and spirals, and you have to think like reality does if you want to understand it." The Mentari presented the greatest challenge because their entire culture was built around individual combat prowess and the honor that came from defeating enemies in personal battle. Colonel Dexmar had survived the massacre that killed General Kethron, and now he commanded warriors who questioned everything they had believed about strength and victory. Amy Davis worked with the Mentari crews and slowly taught them that coordination was not the same as cowardice. "Your ancestors were pack hunters," Amy explained during a training session aboard a Mentari assault ship. "They worked together too. Bring down prey much larger than themselves, but somewhere in your history you forgot that cooperation can be more powerful than individual strength." The Mentari warriors listened with the grudging respect they showed to anyone who had proven themselves in battle, and humans had done that. By surviving when stronger species had fallen, Captain Morrison spent most of his time with Commander Vexstar. Because the Zephyrian fleet provided the backbone of what remained of galactic defense forces, the two leaders worked together for hours each day as Jake slowly introduced concepts that challenged 3,000 years of Zephyrian military tradition. "Patience is not weakness," Jake said during one particularly difficult lesson. "And waiting for the right moment to strike is not the same as being afraid to fight." The cultural barriers seemed impossible to overcome at first because every alien species had developed military doctrines based on their natural advantages. Zephyrians relied on superior individual combat skills and advanced technology, while Mentari trusted in berserker rage and overwhelming aggression. The Nexari used their reality manipulation abilities to solve problems through superior science rather than tactical thinking. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Martinez ran advanced strategy seminars that covered human military history from ancient times to the present day. Alien officers learned about battles where outnumbered forces had defeated superior enemies through better planning and understanding of battlefield psychology. They studied the siege of Troy, where patience and deception overcame mighty walls, and the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held off an army of thousands through superior positioning and tactics. The lessons were hard for proud species to accept because they required admitting that strength alone was not enough to guarantee victory. Commander Vexstar struggled the most because Zephyrian culture viewed any retreat or defensive action as shameful behavior unworthy of true warriors. "This is not how my people fight," he complained during one training exercise where human tactics called for withdrawing from a strong enemy position. Jake Morrison's response cut to the heart of the problem that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. "No, it is not how your people fight," he agreed while studying the tactical situation. "It is how your people survive, and right now, survival is more important than honor or tradition or pride." The words stung, but Vexstar could not argue with their truth because his proud people were dead, and only those willing to learn new ways remained alive. Engineering teams led by Lisa Grant worked throughout the fleet to modify alien ships with human-designed sensor arrays and communication systems. The changes were subtle, but they transformed individual vessels into parts of a larger intelligence network that could share information faster than any single species had ever managed. Zephyrian dreadnoughts became mobile sensor platforms, while Mentari assault ships learned to coordinate their attacks with mathematical precision. The breakthrough came when Amy Davis organized the first joint training exercise between human and alien crews. The simulation involved a complex tactical scenario where multiple species had to work together to defeat an enemy that used psychological warfare and superior technology. The first attempts ended in disaster as alien commanders reverted to their traditional approaches and ignored human coordination protocols, but slowly the lessons began to take hold in alien crews started thinking like parts of a larger organism, rather than individual predators competing for glory. Zephyrian ship captains learned to share targeting data with Mentari boarding teams, while Nexari scientists provided reality manipulation support for human strategic planning. The combination created something entirely new in galactic warfare, and the results exceeded even human expectations. Commander Vexstar finally understood what humans had been trying to teach when he successfully commanded a mixed species formation in a simulation that had been designed to be impossible to win. His ships had used patience and coordination to defeat an enemy force 3 times their size, and for the first time since the battle with the Void Collective, he felt something that might have been hope. Your people learned something that the rest of us missed, Vexstar said to Jake Morrison after the successful exercise. You discovered that thinking like prey can be more powerful than acting like predators? Jake nodded, and his expression showed the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had finally grasped a difficult concept. The galaxy was learning that wisdom was the deadliest weapon of all, and humans were the species best equipped to wield it against any enemy that threatened their new alliance. 6 months had passed since the first terrible defeat, and now the darkness of space filled with enemy ships again. The Void Collective returned with a fleet 3 times larger than before, and their black vessels emerged from nowhere like nightmares. Made real, Commander Vexstar stood on the bridge of his rebuilt ship and watched the sensors count enemy contacts. 300 ships that could phase in and out of reality itself, and each one carried weapons that could tear apart atoms. Captain Jake Morrison sat calmly in the command chair of the Patient Hunter and studied the tactical display. His ship was nothing special to look at, just like all human vessels, but today it would lead the combined fleet for the first time in galactic history. Amy Davis worked at the sensor station, and her fingers flew across controls that fed information to every allied ship in the battle zone. The months of training had changed everything, and now alien crews worked alongside human advisors in perfect coordination. The void ships began their attack just as they had before. Reality bent around their hulls as they prepared to phase through normal space and strike from impossible angles. But this time the galaxy's defenders did something that shocked the ancient enemy. Instead of charging forward to meet the threat, they pulled back into defensive positions and let the small human ships move to the front lines. Jake spoke into his communicator with the same quiet voice he had used in council meetings. All ships maintain formation and follow human tactical guidance. Remember what we learned about patience. Commander Vexstar growled softly but obeyed the order. The proud Zephian had learned to trust human methods even when they went against every warrior instinct he possessed. The Void Collective expected the familiar pattern of galactic warfare. They had fought the same way for millions of years against species that relied on strength and superior technology. Their tactics were built around the assumption that organic life forms would charge forward like angry predators when threatened. The enemy prepared for the usual desperate attacks from inferior beings who would fight with emotion instead of logic. Amy Davis watched her screens and spoke to Jake without looking away from the data streams. Their formation is exactly what we predicted. They're setting up the reality distortion field in the same pattern as last time. Jake nodded and opened communication channels to the entire fleet. All units begin data sharing protocol. Let them come to us. The human ships spread out across the battle zone, but they did not attack. Instead, they became floating sensor platforms that recorded every energy signature and movement pattern the enemy made. Information flowed between allied vessels faster than any single species had ever managed before. Zephyrian ship commanders who once fought alone now shared targeting data with Montari boarding teams. Nexari scientists who had guarded their technology secrets now worked openly with human analysts to solve tactical problems. Colonel Steve Martinez coordinated the intelligence gathering from the Fleet Command Center. His team had studied Void technology for months, and now they put that knowledge to work. Enemy ships are beginning phase variants in sections 2 through 7, he reported. All units prepare for dimensional anchor deployment on my mark. The Void ships move forward with confidence born from countless victories. Their weapons charged with energy that existed in multiple dimensions at once, and their hulls shifted between reality phases to avoid conventional attacks. They had destroyed every enemy they ever faced using the same combination of superior technology and psychological warfare. Fear was their greatest weapon because terrified enemies made mistakes, but The galaxy's defenders were not terrified. Amy Davis had spent months teaching alien crews about human military psychology, and now that training paid off. Fear is just another form of information, she had told them during countless briefings. Process it and use it, but never let it control your decisions. The enemy opened fire with weapons that should have torn the Allied fleet apart. Reality warping beams struck defensive positions and sought to convince matter that it did not exist. But human engineers had prepared for this attack, and their countermeasures activated automatically. Lisa Grant had designed shield modifications that did not try to stop the void weapons but instead confused them about what they were supposed to destroy. Jake Morrison watched the battle develop exactly as human strategists had predicted. The Void Collective was powerful, but they were also predictable because they had never needed to change their tactics. Enemy is committing their main force to the center position, he announced. All units prepare for flanking maneuvers. Commander. Vexstar led his squadron in a movement that looked like retreat but was actually a carefully planned trap. The Zephyrian commander had learned to think like a human tactician, and his warriors followed orders with discipline instead of charging blindly forward. They drew the enemy ships into a position where concentrated fire could do the most damage. The turning point came when Amy Davis made a discovery that changed everything. She had been analyzing void communication patterns and found something unexpected. Jake, they're not individual ships at all, she said with excitement in her voice. The entire fleet is one giant hive mind, and it thinks all organic species fight the same way. The Void Collective had built their strategy around the assumption that carbon-based life forms were all apex predators. They expected territorial aggression and individual heroics because that was how every species they had encountered behaved. Their ancient programming had no protocols for dealing with an enemy that fought as a collective intelligence guided by patience instead of pride. Jake smiled grimly and opened fleet communications. All ships implement Coordination Protocol 7. Time to show them how humans really fight. The response was immediate and devastating. Instead of hundreds of individual ships fighting separate battles, the Allied fleet became a single organism. With human strategic thinking as its brain, Lisa Grant activated the virus she had been preparing for months. It was not designed to destroy void technology, but to make it doubt itself. The computer code spread through enemy systems and convinced their reality phasing equipment that it was malfunctioning. Void ships that had existed safely between dimensions suddenly found themselves locked in normal space where conventional weapons could reach them. The battle ended not with heroic sacrifices or desperate charges, but with methodical precision. Human tactics turned the Void Collective's greatest strength into their fatal weakness. Their hive mind that had conquered galaxies could not adapt to an enemy that refused to fight according to their ancient patterns. When the last enemy ship exploded, Commander Vexstar contacted Jake Morrison directly. Human Captain, I must know why your people do not boast of this victory. You have saved us all, yet you act as if nothing has happened. Jake's answer carried the wisdom of a species that had learned hard lessons about survival. Because the moment we start thinking we're the strongest, we'll forget why we sit in the back row. And the next enemy will teach us that lesson again. The galaxy had learned that true strength came not from superior firepower or advanced technology, but from the wisdom to always keep learning. Humans returned to their position in the back, but now everyone understood that the back row was not where the weakest sat, but where the wisest chose to position themselves.